A small town in Austria. A family house on a residential street. A young woman is dragged into a specially built cellar, chained to the wall and raped. There she remained for 24 years.
I went to see this dungeon, this prison for myself once. I went through it and was very glad to be able to leave.
In that dark, airless space, Elisabeth Fritzl had 7 children. Her tormentor, her own father, Josef Fritzl.
This is the house that no one knew what to do with. It was here in the cellar that Josef Fritzl kept his daughter Elisabeth captive for 24 years. She gave birth to 7 of his children there. It was where one of them, a baby, died. Now, 5 years after the case first came to light, a decision has been taken to fill the cellar with cement. The work will take up to 2 weeks.
For the last time, Josef Fritzl took the long walk to court. A dozen policemen guarding a man who's received thousands of death threats. He looked every inch someone ready to finally face judgment. This is the face of a man who'd been broken. After the cameras had left, his lawyer told the jury it was the presence of his daughter Elisabeth in court this week that made him change his pleas.
In 2008, doctors at a small hospital in Austria received a 19-year-old girl in critical condition. She had no medical history, no identification, and no one could explain how she ended up at their door. The only clue was a handwritten note saying her mother had left her there. But that mother had disappeared without a trace more than 2 decades earlier. As investigators began asking questions, they discovered something far more disturbing than anyone expected, hidden directly beneath a quiet family home. What had been kept secret for 24 years? And how many lives had been affected by the truth no one was ever meant to find? On April 19, 2008, an ambulance rushed a 19-year-old girl named Kirsten into the emergency department of a hospital in Amstetten, Austria. She was suffering from severe seizures and kidney failure. Her condition was critical, and the medical team immediately began working to stabilize her. A short while later, an older man arrived at the hospital. He introduced himself as Josef Fritzl and explained that he had found the girl outside his home. He handed over a handwritten note, claiming it was from the girl's mother. According to the note, the mother had left her daughter there because she could no longer care for her. Josef spoke calmly and provided basic details, but his story was vague and lacked clear answers to the doctor's questions. The medical staff grew concerned almost immediately. Kirsten had no medical records on file. There was no history of previous treatment, no vaccination records, and no documentation of any existing conditions. When doctors asked Josef for more information about her background and her mother's whereabouts, his answers became inconsistent. Something about the situation did not feel right. Hospital staff contacted the police. The officers, who arrived quickly, realized that this case was connected to an old missing person report from 1984, the disappearance of a young woman named Elisabeth Fritzl. At the time, authorities had believed she had run away to join a religious group after receiving letters supposedly written by her. Now, 24 years later, that old case was suddenly reopened with new urgency. As the investigation moved forward, police asked Josef to take them to his home for further checks. He led the officers through the house and down into the basement. They passed through several doors and narrow passages before he finally stopped in front of what appeared to be an ordinary wall. Behind a hidden panel was a reinforced door that only he knew how to open. When the door was unlocked and pushed aside, light from the hallway spilled into the dark space beyond. 3 people stepped out into the light for the first time in many years. A woman in her early 40s and 2 young boys. Their skin was extremely pale, and they blinked against the brightness they had not seen in over 2 decades. The woman was Elisabeth Fritzl. The boys were her sons, Stefan and Felix.
Sich denn heute verantworten?
Deren Verfahren? Herr Fritzl, warum möchten Sie heute nichts sagen? Heute hätten Sie die... Fritzl, wie hat denn das damals angefangen? Können Sie dazu eine Erklärung abgeben?
Back in April 2008, as the officers secured the scene, Elisabeth was carefully brought out of the hidden room. She was weak and disoriented, but alive. Before she would speak in detail, investigators made her a clear promise. She would never have to see her father again. Only after receiving that assurance did she begin to tell them what had really happened inside that hidden space beneath the house for the past 24 years. What started as a routine hospital visit for a sick teenager had now become one of the most shocking investigations in Austrian history. The quiet residential street in Amstetten would never be the same again. Josef Fritzl was born on April 9, 1935, in the quiet town of Amstetten, Austria. He came into the world as a child born out of wedlock during a period when Europe was heading toward one of its darkest chapters. His early childhood was deeply affected by the events of the Second World War. When he was still very young, his mother was taken away and sent to a concentration camp. Josef was placed in an orphanage where he was told that his mother had died. For a time, he grew up believing he had lost his only parent and had to navigate life without her presence or guidance. After the war ended, his mother returned home. However, the reunion did not bring the comfort or security that many children in similar situations might have hoped for. Instead, she displayed strong and controlling behavior. She enforced strict rules and maintained a tight grip over her son's daily life. Josef grew up in an environment where personal freedom was limited and discipline was harsh. These early experiences shaped the way he later viewed family relationships and the idea of control within a household. As he became older, Josef showed a practical interest in technical matters. He studied electrical engineering and eventually worked as a salesman for technical equipment. On the surface, he appeared to be building a stable and respectable life. He was seen as organized, hardworking, and capable. In 1956, he married Rosemary. The couple went on to have 7 children together. From the outside, their family life looked ordinary and stable. Josef presented himself as a responsible father and provider who could take care of his household. Yet even during these years, subtle signs of his personality began to show. He had a strong desire to know exactly where family members were at all times and preferred to make important decisions for them. While he maintained a calm and composed public image as a successful man with property and a family, those who observed him closely could sense that he wanted a high level of control over certain people in his life. This need for dominance was not always obvious to outsiders, but it existed beneath the surface of his everyday behavior. This contrast between the image he showed the world and the private thoughts he kept hidden would later prove to be one of the most striking aspects of his story. For many years, he successfully balanced the role of a respectable community member with plans that remained completely unknown to those around him.
Really quiet, and he makes no appeals. It seems that he is content about it.
Prison officials say the 73-year-old man is under a suicide watch and will be taken to a psychiatric ward. He won't be eligible for parole for at least 15 years, and even then, judges and experts would have to sign off on his release.
Even years later, during the court proceedings, observers noted how calm and accepting Josef appeared once the full extent of his actions was brought into the open. It seemed as though the carefully constructed image he had maintained for decades had finally met the reality of what he had done in private. This gap between the man the public thought they knew and the man who had lived a completely different life behind closed doors would become central to understanding the events that followed. In the years leading up to 1984, the Fritzl family appeared from the outside to be a normal and stable household in the town of Amstetten. Josef Fritzl was seen as a hardworking and responsible man who provided for his wife and children. On the surface, their life followed the usual routines of a typical family in a small Austrian town. Neighbors and acquaintances had little reason to suspect that anything unusual was happening behind closed doors. However, inside the home, Josef maintained strict control over his children. He was particularly strict with his daughter Elisabeth. He wanted to know her whereabouts at all times and made most of the important decisions regarding her life. This controlling behavior created tension within the family, even though it was not always visible to outsiders. In 1983, when she was 17, Elisabeth decided she could no longer accept the restrictions placed on her. she ran away from home and went to Vienna, where she stayed with a friend. For a short period, she experienced a sense of freedom away from the rules that governed her daily life. However, the police eventually located her and brought her back to Amstetten. When she returned, her father made a clear promise. He told her that she would never leave home again. From that moment, the atmosphere in the house became even more controlled. It was around this time that Josef began making plans to create a separate space beneath the family home. He applied for official permission to carry out construction work in the basement. On the application, he stated that the work was for storage space and a shelter that could be used in case of emergency during the Cold War period. The authorities approved the request without raising any concerns, as such projects were not uncommon at the time. Over the following months, Josef spent increasing amounts of time working in the basement. He often stayed there for long hours and did not allow his wife to bring him coffee or check on him. Other members of the family were also told to stay away from that part of the house. Gradually, the basement became a private area that only he could access freely. He worked carefully on the structure, installing strong doors and locks that could only be operated from the outside. By the middle of 1984, the system of doors and locks in the basement was nearly complete. At the same time, Elisabeth was approaching her 18th birthday and had begun thinking about leaving home once again. She had finished her training to become a waitress and had been offered a job in another city. For the first time in a long while, she saw a real possibility of living independently.
Is justice. And when you think that normally for one rape, you get in Austria a punishment started out from 2 years, and in this case are 3,000 rapes, and you can see that this, of course, the only sentence.
Josef Fritzl had spent years preparing the hidden space beneath his home. By the time Elisabeth was ready to start a new chapter in her life, the basement had been transformed into something completely different from what anyone outside the family could have imagined. August 28, 1984, started as an ordinary day in the Fritzl household in Amstetten. Elisabeth, who had recently turned 18, was looking forward to beginning a new chapter in her life. She had completed her training to become a waitress and had received a job offer in another city. For the first time in years, she felt a real possibility of gaining independence and living away from the strict rules that had governed her daily life at home. That morning, her father Josef asked her for help with a simple task. He told her that he needed assistance carrying a door down to the basement. Without any suspicion, Elisabeth agreed and followed him downstairs. However, the moment she stepped into the basement, the situation changed completely. Josef had already prepared everything in advance. As soon as she entered the space, he locked the heavy reinforced door behind her. In that single instant, Elisabeth lost her freedom and became trapped underground. From that moment onward, she would remain confined in the hidden space beneath the house. There was no opportunity to resist or escape. The door had been designed and installed in such a way that it could only be opened from the outside. What had begun as an ordinary request from her father turned into the start of a long and completely hidden period of captivity. After locking her inside, Josef forced Elisabeth to write a letter to send back to the family. In the letter, she was made to say that she had decided to leave home and join a group. She wrote that she did not want anyone to search for her and that she was doing well on her own. To make the story appear more believable, Josef arranged for the letter to be posted from a location far away from Amstetten. When the letter eventually arrived at the house, it created the strong impression that Elisabeth had left voluntarily to start a new life somewhere else. The police were notified about her disappearance. After receiving the letter and conducting only a brief investigation, they concluded that this was a typical case of a young woman who had chosen to run away and join a religious or social group. With no signs of struggle or any other evidence suggesting something more serious, the missing person case was officially closed after a relatively short period of time. Life in the house above the basement continued as normal. Family members and people in the community accepted the story that Elisabeth had simply decided to leave home. Meanwhile, in the hidden space below, a completely different reality had begun. Elisabeth was now completely cut off from the outside world. She had no way to contact anyone or let others know what had actually happened. In just one single day, her entire life had been taken away from her. While everyone above ground continued to believe that she had left of her own free will, the contrast between the two worlds was sharp and complete. Above the basement, daily life carried on without suspicion. Below the floor of the same house, Elisabeth had already begun a life of total isolation. No one outside the basement knew the truth, and the ordinary-looking family home on a quiet street now held a secret that would remain hidden for the next 24 years.
Ihrem Verfahren? Herr Fritzl, warum möchten Sie heute nichts sagen? Heute hätten Sie die...
Herr Fritzl, wie hat denn das damals angefangen? Können Sie dazu eine Erklärung abgeben?
What began on that summer day in 1984 would later be recognized as the start of one of the most shocking cases in modern Austrian history. While the world above continued to move forward under the belief that Elisabeth had run away, the reality hidden beneath the house was far more disturbing and remained completely unknown for more than 2 decades. Over a period of several years, Josef Fritzl carefully prepared a hidden space beneath the family home. As someone trained in electrical engineering, he took on the design and construction work himself. He did not rush the project. Instead, he worked gradually, making sure every detail was planned and executed according to his own requirements. What began as a request for storage space and a possible shelter eventually turned into something far more complex and secretive. The basement was built with multiple small rooms connected by narrow corridors. The doors were made of reinforced concrete and designed to be extremely difficult to open from the inside. Josef installed an electronic locking system that could only be operated using a specific code or remote device that only he controlled. This meant that once someone was inside, they had no way to leave without his permission. The layout was intentionally confusing, almost like a maze, with rooms leading into one another, in a way that made navigation difficult for anyone unfamiliar with the space. Inside the basement, there was a basic bedroom area, a small space for cooking with simple equipment, a bathroom, and areas used for storage. Josef installed electric lights so the space would not be completely dark. In later years, he also brought in a television and a radio. These were not meant for entertainment, but rather to allow the people inside to receive limited information from the outside world. Even with these additions, the overall environment remained isolated and controlled. Josef made regular trips down to the basement, bringing food, supplies, and other necessary items. At the same time, he maintained strict control over who could enter or approach that part of the house. His wife was not allowed to bring him coffee or check on him while he was working there. Other family members were also told to stay away from the basement area. Over time, the space became completely off limits to everyone except Josef himself. The construction was carried out in stages. He obtained official permission by stating that the work was for storage and a nuclear fallout shelter, which was a common request during the Cold War period. Because he had professional knowledge and connections, he was able to source materials and carry out the work without raising suspicion from neighbors or authorities. The space was quite messy, with all kinds of machine parts lying around and a writing desk. It was a maze of small rooms. It was humid and had an unpleasant smell. As more people eventually came to live in the basement, the original space became too small. Josef allowed the area to be expanded, but the additional work had to be done by hand. Elisabeth and the children who lived there were required to dig out more space themselves over a long period of time. This expansion turned the basement into an even larger and more complicated structure, further separating it from the normal world above. What had started as a private project in the basement gradually became a fully functioning hidden environment. Josef had spent years designing and building a space that allowed him to maintain complete control while keeping everything hidden from the outside world. By the time the system was fully developed, the basement had become a self-contained area that very few people would ever know existed. If you want to hear more detailed stories like this, 1. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any new videos. During the many years Elisabeth was held in the basement, she gave birth to 7 children. Each birth took place under extremely difficult conditions, as she had to manage everything without proper medical assistance or support. Josef made all the decisions regarding what would happen to the children immediately after they were born, and these decisions shaped the lives of everyone involved for years to come. 3 of the children were taken upstairs by Josef shortly after birth. He presented them to his wife Rosemary as babies who had been left at the front door of the house. He claimed that their mother had abandoned them and could no longer take care of them. To make this story appear believable, he forced Elisabeth to write letters that were placed with the children. These letters were created under his instructions and helped support the idea that the babies had been found and needed a home. Josef and Rosemary eventually took steps to raise these 3 children as part of their family upstairs. From the outside, it looked as though the family had simply accepted responsibility for children who had been left behind by their mother. The other 3 children remained in the basement with Elisabeth. They grew up entirely within the hidden space and had no contact with the world above during their early years. Their entire childhood was shaped by the conditions inside the basement. They had no experience of sunlight, open spaces, or normal daily life outside. Elisabeth became their only source of care, comfort, and guidance throughout this time. One of the baby boys passed away shortly after birth due to breathing difficulties. Josef handled the situation without seeking any outside help or medical intervention. This event added further hardship to an already painful and isolated situation for everyone involved. Despite the severe limitations of the environment, Elisabeth took on the full responsibility of caring for the children who stayed with her. She had to manage their daily needs using only the basic resources available inside the basement. There was very little space, limited supplies, and no access to normal support systems. Still, she tried her best to create some form of structure and routine for the children. She taught them basic reading and writing using whatever materials she could find or were brought to her. She established small daily habits and tried to give the children a sense of order and learning, even though they were growing up in a highly restricted and hidden environment. Raising children under such conditions required constant effort and careful planning. Elisabeth had to balance the immediate needs of the children with the reality of their complete isolation. She focused on giving them as much care and basic education as possible, often using simple methods and repetition to help them learn. Her determination to maintain some level of normalcy for the children became one of the central parts of life inside the basement. The difference between the children living upstairs and those living in the basement was clear. The 3 children upstairs grew up as part of the visible family and had access to everyday life, school, and social interactions. The 3 children downstairs remained completely hidden and had no knowledge of the outside world. Elisabeth carried the emotional and practical weight of both situations at the same time, doing everything within her power to protect and support the children who were with her.
And he makes no appeals. It seems that he is content about it.
Prison officials say the 73-year-old man is under a suicide watch and will be taken to a psychiatric ward.
Elisabeth's consistent efforts to care for her children and provide them with basic education, despite being under complete control and living in isolation, showed a strong determination to give them the best possible foundation she could manage. Even in an environment where every aspect of life was restricted, she focused on maintaining routines, teaching the children, and creating a sense of stability for them. Her actions became one of the few sources of structure and care available to the children who grew up alongside her in the basement. Josef Fritzl maintained a carefully organized double life for more than 2 decades. On the surface, he appeared to be a normal and responsible man. He was seen as a father, a husband, and the owner of a house in a quiet residential area. He interacted with neighbors, managed his properties, and carried out his daily activities in a way that did not raise suspicion from those around him. From the outside, his life looked ordinary and stable. However, beneath this normal appearance, he exercised complete control over a hidden part of his life. The basement of his house had become a completely separate world that only he could access. He made sure that no one else in the family was allowed to enter that area. He told his wife and children that the basement was his private workspace and that they should not go there. Over time, this rule became accepted within the household, and the basement remained off limits to everyone except Josef. To further protect the secrecy of the basement, Josef rented out rooms in his house to many different tenants over the years. While he allowed people to live in parts of the house, he strictly controlled their movements. Tenants were not permitted to go into the garden or near the area above the basement. He created rules and explanations that prevented anyone from getting too close to the hidden space. This allowed him to keep the existence of the basement unknown to the people living under the same roof. Josef also used frequent business trips as a way to manage his double life. He often traveled to other cities or regions for work, which gave him a believable reason to be away from home for extended periods. During these trips, he could bring back supplies and items needed for the basement without drawing attention. These absences also helped him maintain the appearance of a busy and hardworking man who had legitimate reasons to travel. One of the most important elements in keeping the secret hidden was the system of fake letters and the story about Elisabeth joining a group. For many years, letters were sent to the family claiming that Elisabeth was living with a religious or social group and did not want to be contacted. These letters were carefully managed to keep the story consistent over time. Because the letters continued to arrive from different locations, the explanation remained believable to both the family and the authorities. When social services became involved with the 3 children who had been brought upstairs, they conducted checks on the family. However, Josef provided explanations that were accepted without deeper investigation. He presented the children as having been left at the door by their mother, and the supporting letters helped make this story appear credible. Social services did not find any clear reasons to suspect that something more serious was happening, partly because Josef maintained a calm and cooperative appearance during their visits. Through a combination of strict rules at home, controlled access for tenants, frequent travel, and a consistent false story, Josef was able to keep the existence of the basement and the people inside it hidden from the outside world for 24 years. The surface of his life remained normal and unremarkable, while the reality below stayed completely unknown to almost everyone around him. In early 2008, Kirsten, who was 19 years old, suddenly became very ill. She began suffering from severe seizures, and her condition quickly worsened due to kidney failure. Her health declined rapidly, and it soon became clear that she needed urgent medical care. Josef had no choice but to take her to the hospital, as her situation had become too serious to ignore. He brought her to the emergency department in Amstetten, where doctors immediately began treating her critical condition. At the hospital, the medical staff quickly noticed several unusual things about Kirsten's case. She had no medical records on file. There was no history of previous treatment, no documentation of any existing health conditions, and no information about vaccinations or past illnesses. When doctors asked Josef for more details about her background and medical history, his answers were vague and inconsistent. He claimed that he had found her outside and that her mother had left a note, but he struggled to provide clear explanations about where Kirsten had been living or why she had no medical documents. The doctors became increasingly suspicious because the story did not add up with the condition of the patient in front of them. Hospital staff decided to contact the police. When officers arrived and began asking questions, they soon realized that this situation might be connected to an old missing person case from 1984. That was the year when a young woman named Elisabeth Fritzl had disappeared from the same family home. At the time, the case had been closed after letters were received suggesting that she had left to join a group. Now, more than 20 years later, the police decided to reopen the investigation because of the inconsistencies in Josef's story and the mysterious condition of the young woman in the hospital. As the investigation progressed, police requested that Josef cooperate and allow them to examine his home. Around the same time, Elisabeth was brought to the hospital to see her daughter. She had been living in the basement for many years and had not seen the outside world during that time. When she arrived at the hospital, she was initially very hesitant to speak. She had lived under strict control for so long that she was afraid of the consequences of telling the truth. However, after several hours of being repeatedly assured by the police that she would be protected and that she would never have to see her father again, she finally began to reveal what had actually happened. Once Elisabeth started speaking, the full picture of what had been hidden for more than 2 decades started to emerge. The police acted quickly after hearing her account. They immediately went to the family house and began a thorough search. During the search, they discovered a hidden door behind what appeared to be a normal wall in the basement. Behind that door was a secret room that had been carefully constructed and concealed for many years. When the officers entered the hidden space, they found 2 more people inside Elisabeth's sons, Stefan and Felix, who had also been living there without anyone outside knowing of their existence. The discovery of the secret basement marked the end of a long period of complete secrecy. What had started as a medical emergency involving a young woman with no medical history quickly turned into one of the most shocking investigations in the country. The events that unfolded in the hospital and during the subsequent search of the house brought to light a hidden reality that had remained unknown for 24 years. The trial of Josef Fritzl began in March 2009 at the Regional Court in Streetpulten, Austria. The case had already drawn enormous public attention across the country and beyond, not only because of the shocking nature of the crimes, but also because they had remained hidden for 24 years inside an ordinary family home. The courtroom was filled with journalists, legal observers, and members of the public who had followed the case since the dramatic discovery in 2008. From the very first day, the atmosphere inside the courtroom was heavy and tense. Everyone present understood that this was not an ordinary criminal trial. Josef Fritzl initially took a defensive position. He admitted to some of the charges, including incest and certain aspects of the long-term imprisonment, but he appeared reluctant to accept full responsibility for the most serious accusations, particularly those involving coercion and the death of one of the children. His demeanor during the early stages of the trial was relatively composed. He listened to the proceedings and occasionally conferred with his defense lawyer. However, everything changed when the court decided to play the long video recorded testimony that Elisabeth had given to the police and investigators months earlier. The video testimony lasted for many hours. In it, Elisabeth described in detail what her life had been like inside the hidden basement since 1984. She spoke about the conditions she endured, the births of her children, the constant control she lived under, and the psychological pressure of never knowing whether she or her children would ever be free. The impact of watching and hearing this testimony was immediate and visible. After the video was played, Josef Fritzl became noticeably quieter and more withdrawn. He no longer challenged the prosecution's narrative with the same energy. Observers in the courtroom noted that he appeared to shrink into himself, often staring at the floor or avoiding eye contact with anyone present. The long and detailed account from his daughter seemed to remove whatever remaining defense he had prepared. The prosecution presented a wide range of evidence during the trial. This included police reports from the search of the house, forensic analysis of the hidden basement, medical examinations of Elisabeth and the children, and statements from witnesses who had interacted with the family over the years. The court also heard details about how the basement had been constructed over many years and how Josef had managed to keep its existence secret from his wife, his other children, tenants, and social services. One of the most difficult parts of the evidence concerned the child who had died shortly after birth. The prosecution argued that the infant could have survived with proper medical care, and that Josef's decision not to seek help amounted to murder by neglect. After several days of hearings and careful consideration of all the evidence, the court delivered its final verdict. Josef Fritzl was found guilty on every charge brought against him. These included false imprisonment, coercion, incest, and murder by neglect. The judge sentenced him to life imprisonment. Furthermore, the court ordered that he serve this sentence in a secure psychiatric facility, specifically designed for offenders who required mental health treatment alongside incarceration. The verdict was declared final and binding. Neither the defense nor the prosecution chose to file an appeal, meaning there would be no further legal challenges to the outcome.
Prison officials say the 73-year-old man is under a suicide watch and will be taken to a psychiatric ward. He won't be eligible for parole for at least 15 years, and even then, judges and experts would have to sign off on his release. Elisabeth and her 6 surviving children have spent the last several months recovering at a secret location. Court officials say she can seek unlimited damages for her suffering in a separate civil trial.
This is justice. Normally, one case of coercion would receive a sentence starting from 2 years in Austria. In this case, there were approximately 3,000 incidents. So this is the only sentence that is possible. Following the sentencing, Josef was immediately taken into custody and transferred to begin serving his life sentence in the psychiatric facility. At the same time, a very different process began for Elisabeth and her 6 surviving children. They were moved to a secret, protected location where they could start the long and difficult journey of recovery away from public view. For the first time in more than 2 decades, they were no longer under the control that had defined their entire existence. While the trial had brought a legal conclusion to one of the most disturbing cases in recent European history, The personal process of healing, rebuilding trust, and learning how to live in freedom was only beginning for Elisabeth and her children. The verdict marked the end of a long period of hidden suffering, but it also opened the door to a new and uncertain chapter for those who had survived it. After the trial concluded in 2009, Elisabeth and her 6 surviving children began the long process of rebuilding their lives. They were given new identities and relocated to a secret location, whose address has never been publicly revealed. This protection was considered necessary because of the intense media attention the case had attracted. In their new home, they received extensive medical care and long-term psychological support. Therapists and doctors worked with them for many years to help them adjust to a world that had moved forward without them. The children who had grown up in the basement faced particular challenges. Some gradually learned to adapt to life outside. They began to attend school, make friends, and experience normal daily activities. However, others continued to struggle with basic things that most people take for granted. Bright sunlight, open spaces, and the sounds of the outside world could feel overwhelming. For those children, the transition from a small, dark, and controlled environment to a free and unpredictable world was not easy and required years of patient support. Meanwhile, Josef Fritzl, who later changed his name, continued to serve his life sentence inside a secure psychiatric facility. By 2026, he was over 90 years old. His physical and mental health had declined significantly due to advanced age. Although he remained in custody, the focus of his case had shifted from punishment to managing the final years of an elderly prisoner. The man who once controlled every detail of life inside a hidden basement now lived under the constant supervision of others. The case had a lasting impact far beyond the individuals involved. In Austria, it prompted serious reforms in how institutions handle cases of missing persons and child welfare. Social services and police departments reviewed their procedures for investigating disappearances within families. New guidelines were introduced to ensure that reports of missing children or vulnerable adults receive more thorough follow-up, even when initial explanations appear reasonable. Training programs for social workers and law enforcement were updated to help them recognize warning signs that might be hidden behind a seemingly normal family situation. The case also sparked wider public discussions about domestic control, the importance of listening to children, and the responsibility of communities to notice when something feels wrong. Perhaps the most important legacy of this case lies in the quiet lessons it left behind. It showed the extraordinary strength of a person who endured unimaginable circumstances for decades and still found ways to protect and care for her children. It also demonstrated how easily people can look away when everything on the surface appears normal. For 24 years, neighbors, relatives, and officials interacted with the Fritzl family without realizing what was happening just beneath their feet. The case serves as a reminder that appearances can be deeply misleading, and that paying attention to small inconsistencies or unusual behaviors can sometimes make a life-changing difference. If stories like this, one, make you more aware of the quiet struggles that can exist behind closed doors, consider subscribing to the channel. New episodes explore similar cases and the lessons they leave for all of us.